Edition of History in a Drink. I'm Shawn.
And I'm Frank. And tonight we're going to be going to St. Lucia or St. Lucia. We've heard it two different ways pronounced. So
exactly.
Now I'm going to call it St. Lucia.
St. Lucia, I will too. Now, a little bit about what we're doing this season. We're actually traveling around the Caribbean. For you guys who've been here with us all along.
Right. So we started here in Sarasota and did one of our local rums, but then we've gone to Cuba, to Haiti, to Jamaica, to Nicaragua, to Barbados, and tonight we are going to focus in on St. Lucia, which is one of these tiny little islands in the windward chain of islands.
They're called the Windward Islands, I'm assuming, versus the leeward and the windward side.
Exactly. So, and this is a special night because I reached out to all different rum companies all around the Caribbean to see if they would sponsor us or do something with us, and this was the only company that reached back out to us. So
our local Siesta Key rum reached out to us as well. So yeah, but this one we actually have bottles tonight of Chairman's Reserve sent all the way from St. Lucia.
Exactly. And so I want to give a big shout out to Lexi, who was my contact and got us this rum, and she got us some t-shirts and some other prizes for tonight as well. So it's really nice to finally be able to talk and hear some interesting things about the rum company, because they're a pretty outstanding rum company.
Yeah.
So why don't we just start there with
let's talk about it. Exactly.
Company. So this is is the oldest rum company in St. Lucia.
Okay.
All right. So it was started in 1931. Okay. Okay. Now there was rum here before this, but this is the distillery at Denani.
Okay.
Right? And this one was started by Dennis Bernard.
Okay.
Right? So, and then in 1972 there was one other distillery on the island, and the two of them merged and they became St. Lucia Rum Company.
Gotcha.
Right? Now the chairman of the board was Bernard's son, Laurie. And he is the one who made this style of rum for them, because he looked at it and he's like, we need to be doing something different. And so they had pot stills and they had some column stills, but they began to use what was called a coffee still.
Coffee, not like the coffee drink, coffee with a Y.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this still is unique because it's a pot still with a column on it.
Gotcha.
Right. Okay. And what he went for is the blending, just like we've talked about with these other rums.
Yep.
And there was 4 components that he really looked at when he did the blending for these. Right. So he looked at ages. So they have anywhere from a rum that is as young as 3 up to 20 years in this. And that's in all of them.
Right.
Right. They're middle of the road rums, like the one we've got here. They average 8 to 11-year-old. Right. Then finishes. So what is the rum finished in? So is it in a sherry cask, or is it in a bourbon cask, or some other different
because
things?
Those barrels that they put in add flavor to that rum as well.
Right. And sometimes they're moved between them.
Yeah.
All right. Then the different styles, right? Whether it's a white rum or an amber rum, a dark rum, right? And then even the base materials. Because, we talk about it being a spiced rum. Well, there's lots of those spices that can go in there, right? Like nutmeg or cinnamon or vanilla, all of these kind of things. And so they can play around with their different spice groups while they're
making the rum.
The rum as well. Exactly. All right. So he was alive from 1945 to 2012. And he began this idea in 1999, right? And then shortly after he died, they were bought up by a much bigger group, all right, called the Bernard Hoyt Group.
Okay.
And they are the ones who then really started to renovate and push them onto this global market.
And I'm sure put distribution more than anything, but everything is still made in St. Lucia. Everything's still made with those traditional coffee stills.
And there's still his blending team there.
Right.
So that was one of the really interesting things that they on their website. They talk specifically about having this blending team and how they work together to create these unique tastes and all of that.
Now, we wouldn't be history and a drink if we didn't have our drink to go with our history too. So tonight we actually have made up rum old fashions. So instead of the traditional old fashioned with whiskey, we had it made with rum tonight.
Yeah, exactly. What better for the chairman to drink?
Exactly, perfect.
Now, what I also found really fascinating about this company was their commitment to St. Lucia.
Mm-hmm.
So they offer all of their employees these huge medical benefits that realistically most people on the island don't have.
Right.
Educational opportunities to go and get educated other places because there's not a lot of universities and those.
Sure.
Right. And then they help them get homes through loans and stuff like that through the company.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And St. Lucia is not a really big island anyway. So I mean, it's kind of a great opportunity.
It's got roughly about 180,000 people living on it. Now, the other thing, too, is they have a commitment to the descendants from the former estate. So those former slaves.
Oh.
And to me, that reminds me of Jack Daniels and Uncle Nearest and that whole thing, and how they want to make sure that they're giving back and making sure those people have the ability to raise themselves up.
Yeah.
And then the thing with it being close to Christmas time, every year they have a party, and every child on the island who's 1 day old to 13-year-old gets gifts.
Excellent. All from the Chairman's Reserve Distilling Company.
Exactly. Great. Which I think is pretty amazing because we don't really hear about that outreach with lots of other companies and stuff like that. Now, lots of them do that, but they take pride in doing these things, and I think that's something that we should applaud them for.
Excellent. So awesome rum company. Let's talk about St. Lucia itself, the island.
All right. So St. Lucia has been settled by people living in the Caribbean for thousands of years, and it was known as Ainola and also as Hewanora by the two Native American groups that lived there, the last one being from the Caribs. But when we look at it, for our purposes, it was settled by the French. And sometimes it got this nickname called the Helen of the West, right? And it's a reference to Helen of Troy being the most beautiful woman, and how Troy and the Greeks are fighting over her and back and forth and back and forth. So St. Lucia is under British and French control. It changes hands over 14 times in the better part of 200 years.
Right.
So they have a really mixed culture there, that they have some people who speak Creole. They have English speaking, all of this stuff.
And I would think that the natives just kind of roll with whatever's happening.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Hey, we're British this week. Next week we're French. We just kind of roll with it. It's kind of a Caribbean theme.
Yeah. So what that means is the rums here are kind of a blend. So you remember how we talked about the French islands doing it from the sugar cane, and
the British islands doing it more from molasses.
Yep. So there's a combination in here of that.
Now the other thing with St. Lucia or St. Lucia that I find is it's named after a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to have a country named after a woman is pretty unique.
Yeah, there's only 2 nations in the world that are named for women.
And what are St. Lucia is the first?
In Ireland.
In Ireland. So is the second.
So in the Irish spelling.
Spelling, yeah.
All right. So and the name comes from St. Lucy of Syracuse, and she was a martyr in the early part of the 500s or so, and during actually a little bit earlier, during one of the Roman emperors, she was eventually. The story goes that she was supposed to be burned as a witch.
Yep.
And the logs wouldn't light on fire. So then they ultimately they gouged her eyes out for some reason, and then ultimately they cut her neck.
Okay.
But when she was buried, her eyes suddenly were back in her head, and all this.
And there's a miracle, and hence sainthood. So.
Exactly. Right. So the island itself doesn't really have a ton of really history stuff that I could teach about. The one major thing that I found is that during World War II, the German U-boat actually attacked the capital city's harbor and sank 2 British ships there.
Mhm.
And that was really their total participation in the war, right? But what we know it for is its huge tourist industry.
Gotcha.
And so that is their biggest moneymaker there, right?
And they've got a big port, so cruise ships can go in.
Yeah.
They're easy to navigate.
So, excuse me, the other interesting person was the man who kind of settled it, this Frenchman, right? And his name was Francis Leclerc, which he was known as Jambe de Bois,
Okay.
or Plata de Plow, right? Which translates to peg leg.
Peg leg.
So he was actually a peg-legged
I was
pirate.
saying this sounds like privateer, like Pirates of the Caribbean, literally.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So he early on in his life got injured in a battle against the English at Guernsey, lost his leg, significantly damaged his arm. So he walked with a peg leg. And so he had no, he had tons of quarrels with the
British,
with the British and the Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So he raided all over the Atlantic, in the Azores, in the Canary Islands, in Puerto Rico. He is instrumental in why Havana becomes the capital of Cuba, because Santiago de Cuba was the original capital. But they burned it to the ground and everything, so that they moved it to Havana.
So real pirate, Peg Leg the pirate, and then he finally settles in St. Lucia.
Well, yeah, and so it's really funny because the King of England, George I, gives the island to this coal magnate and makes him a duke and blah, blah, blah. And so he sends 2,000 people to settle the island, thinking that it's going to be easy to take them. Well, they're all there, and they just whoop them. And of that 2,000, only 89 survived. All right?
Yeah.
So, and that leads us to the namesake of the island, right? So, she is from Syracuse, in Sicily, and that's where her story takes place.
St. Lucia.
Yep, St. Lucia. Now, the key sport there
in St. Lucia
is cricket. So I read and watched some videos for about a half hour today trying to understand cricket.
I have no idea. I don't know anything about cricket.
I have no clue. So did you know that they can play games in 3 different ways?
Okay.
So you can play a day game, which is 7 hours in one day.
Okay.
All right. Then they have what they call the T20s, which is like the junior league, which is one day for 3 hours.
Okay.
All right. And then a traditional game is 5 days of 7-hour days, 35 hours of this. And I just don't get it. The point scoring or kind of stuff. And I was on a website that was trying to compare it to baseball.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I see that's similar is they both use a ball and a bat.
But a standard game is 7 hours long.
For 5 days.
For 5.
That's the traditional game.
Right.
So I don't know. You get to go to bed, have dinner, go
take
out
breaks
drinking
in between.
I don't know. It just is crazy and think about 7 hours of gameplay. Yeah. How freaking boring is that to watch? So right? It's like almost worse than watching golf. So that is their most famous person is a cricket player.
Okay, because they do have international cricket.
Yeah, and his name is Darren Sammy.
Darren Sammy.
And when I was talking with Lexi, the drink she suggested that we have was called a Sammy. And what it is he really liked that rum, and he would just put it in a glass and mix it with coconut water. And that's called a Sammy, and that's how everybody on St. Lucia drinks it. So, but he's important because he's the first player in St. Lucia history to go and play cricket internationally. Mm-hmm. They don't have their own team. They have the West Indies team. So it is St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Barbados, and a couple other islands. It takes all of them to be able to put together a team.
team.
And now and on that team, he was able to win the T20 tournament twice, once in 2012 and once in 2016. And in 2012, it was against Sri Lanka.
Mhm.
And then in 2016, it was against India. And when I was looking at the countries that play cricket, they're all from the former British Empire.
Gotcha.
It wasn't, United States wasn't listed anywhere there, right? And Canada was down at the bottom, but I don't know anywhere in Canada where they play it
I
either.
haven't
It's
seen
too
too
cold.
much either.
But he went on and he played in lots of other leagues.
Yeah.
And one of the other big places that I never realized that this was in Pakistan. And he led them to so many victories and stuff like that, that he actually earned the highest civilian medal that you could, and that was given to him by their president in roughly about
For
2020.
his cricket playing.
For his cricket play and for his coaching,
Gotcha.
because that's what he really does now is the coaching aspect of it. So one of the things I'm going to try and do is go and find him playing, because he set a bunch of different records and stuff like that, which I didn't understand what they meant. So all I knew that they were important records.
Because they played for 5 days.
Yeah, exactly. I just can't get that.
Yeah.
All right. So that's really kind of our story about
Cool.
St. Lucia today.
Excellent. So we talked about cricket, we talked about the kind of history and what it was, and
Yep.
Chairman's Reserve rum. So
Yeah.
excellent. So for those of you guys who are on the internet, thank you guys for tuning on in. We're actually once again live here at the Baha'i Hut. After our lesson tonight, we do trivia, and we actually had some great stuff sent to us from Chairman's Reserve, so that's gonna be some of our prizes.
Yep.
If you guys are in Sarasota on a Monday night, come on down and have a great old time. And like I said, we're going to keep it rolling here, but we'll say goodbye to you guys on the internet and talk to you later.
Yeah. And next week, we're going to be heading to another one of these small islands and trying a very unique rum as well. And I'll
Excellent.
save that
All
for
right,
next
well,
week.
secret one. So another travel around the Caribbean. So,
All right.
all right.